is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 624. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line, all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, how's the quest for sleep been going?
Oh, a lot better. We've gotten some new techniques and, in fact, paid for premium content, a video course on how to, how to get better sleep and how to have your newborn sleep better. And it actually works.
Really? You got Channel Fire Baby Pro?
Exactly. So we're like 3 days into that, and it's been a dramatic improvement. So I'm starting to feel, pretty human again. So
you bought instructional stuff and it's working.
Yep.
That is awesome. Wow. That's really great. It's hard to find good info sometimes, even with magic, it can be like that. But, when you find something that really works, it can change your whole life.
Yeah. It's made us into evangelists. I mean, once you find something that works, it is like, you obviously, we told some of our friends who had, young children or whatever.
Yeah.
So pretty funny.
Well, great. That's nice. That's really good. I'm glad things are going. How's Santi doing in general?
Oh, he's doing great. He's getting to the point where we've had to retire some of his clothes because he's bigger than those clothes, which is wild.
God. That was fast. Wow. Okay. Yeah, good. Hang on
he's
for
at
the
an age
ride.
where that's good news still.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, let's just say hang on to that credit card because he's going to be burning through. Well, that's great to hear. We've got on the podcast this week, we've got the format overview. Formerly known as the First Impression Show for Crimson Vow. And we're also going to cover Seal Deck this week on the show. Since GPs haven't really been a thing, we've kind of gone away from doing our Seal Deck episode every time because we felt like there wasn't enough events that were Seal Deck focused to make it worth it. We did it a couple of times after they started doing the, the Arena Opens. So whenever there is something coming up, that's when we'll do them. And there's something coming up this time. We've got what is it called? MTG Vegas, I guess.
Yeah, it's just the big magic kind of celebration in Vegas that Channel Fireball's running. And then there's also a lot more random tournament play in general. So a lot of stuff going on. So
we're going to be covering that and on the show this week, plus Crack-a-Packs and everything else. And speaking of Channel Fireball, they're one of the sponsors of this show. And if you are going to head down to MTG Vegas, I'm going to be there. I'll be playing in the Seal tournament on Saturday. And then if I make it to day 2, I'll be battling on Sunday. If not, I'll find, I don't know, maybe me and Woody will play Two-Headed Giant or we'll do a bunch of drafts or something like that. But I'll be around. I know a bunch of people are. And you can come up and say hi. I think with social distancing, that sort of thing is going to be a little bit different, and there'll have to be some, I don't really know how that's going to go. I'm going to have to say no hugs, no handshakes, but I'm happy to say hi and chat. And I hope to see you there. And if you are going to be battling in the Sealed, like I mentioned, we've got that here. You can also head over to channelfireball.com for the marketplace, where if you want to buy singles, you want to get your Crimson Vow stuff or older stuff or whatever, you can head over there. And they're a marketplace now, which means that they're like an aggregator for card shops. So, imagine your LGS or a smaller website. They will now show up when you search for the singles on channelfireball.com. And you can pick the singles that you want and the condition you want. You can shop by price, by reliability, all that kind of stuff, but you still get the same Channel Fireball, kind of customer service checkout and all that kind of stuff. So, you can trust the whole process. And, one of the many great things going on over at channelfireball.com. If you do end up picking up anything over there, use the affiliate code LR at checkout. We do appreciate it. The show is also brought to you by FTX. In the US, it's ftx.us, and outside, it's ftx.com. And this is, one of the biggest and safest, secure places that you can go to explore the world of digital assets. These are things like cryptocurrency, NFTs, that type of stuff. These are all based on a technology called blockchain, and there's a lot of really interesting, exciting stuff going on behind the scenes and sometimes even in front of the scenes in this space. And if you want to get in on it, FTX is the place to go. They have an app and a website, so you can go on and buy, sell, manage any of the digital assets that you want as we kind of go into this brave new world. of this space. Now, I do want to mention, though, of course, there's always risk associated with investment of any kind. Make sure that you consult an investment professional before you do investment, really, of any sort. And of course, Luis and I, well, we're not investment professionals. But yeah, so make sure you check out ftx.com and ftx.us accordingly. And of course, there's a Patreon, patreon.com/limited resources. If you want to support the show directly, that's the place to go. Okay, let's crack some packs here, Luis. I actually have a couple of packs of Crimson Vow, and this feels nice. Oh,
I know, really? Actual packs.
Wow, this is weird. Yeah, this is good practice for me for the weekend. I have to remember how to like handle physical Magic cards. Hold on a sec. Oh yeah, it's still good. Fresh pack smell, still very much.
I'm so jealous you're getting to go to a tournament this weekend. That's so cool.
Yeah, I am. I feel a little weird about it just because it's been so long. I'm like, wow, what do I even do at these things? But I really can't wait. I wish you were there. I totally understand, of course. But, you know, as always, these tournaments end up being more about the people than anything else. And yeah, I'll be posting a bunch of pictures. You can live vicariously through me. Okay, first card out is Cradle of Safety. This is the 1 in a blue flash aura enchantment that enchants a creature you control and gives it hexproof until end of turn and +1/+1.
I played this card in like the kind of aggressive blue-white decks, and it's been fine. It's a playable. It's not one I would take early, and it's not like a super high priority, but when timed right, this card can be really devastating.
Yeah, I played it in a deck that had 2 creatures that I felt were worth protecting, and they also happen to cost 5 mana. So these weren't 7 mana creatures where I'd have to really be forced to leave the shields down. I could actually engineer a situation where I could fire this off in response, and it did its job. Yeah, it's a little below par on average, but when you can set up a good situation, it does do work. Unholy Efficient is next. This is the white 1/2 with Vigilance, and you can pay 4 and a white to put a counter on it, +1/+1 counter on it. This card has not done well.
Oh no.
It's a brick. Next is Lacerate Flesh. This is the 4 and a red sorcery that does 4 damage to a creature, and you get blood tokens equal to the amount of excess damage dealt to that creature with this thing.
It's fine. It's not great, but it's certainly playable.
Yeah. I would definitely pick it here so far. Cruel Witness. This is the 2 blue 3/3 flyer. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you get to surveil.
Cruelness is good. I mean, it's a good card. I'm not really that interested in playing blue in this format,
Same.
Unfortunately.
I have tried it, but yeah, blue has been largely disappointing.
I would still take Cruel Witness over Lacerate Flesh. Pick one, pack one, but I would hope to not take neither.
I would take Lacerate Flesh at this point. I mean, Cruel Witness is a better card on paper, but blue has not held up its end of the deal.
Not an unreasonable pick at all.
It's also weird because, you know, the blue cards aren't actually bad. It's just the format has played out in a fairly assertive, aggressive way. And, you know, taking like 4 mana to draw some cards or whatever can be really, really punishing. Undying Malice is next. It's black for an instant. Until end of turn, target creature gains. When this creature dies, return to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it. People have been playing this card. Maybe it's okay. I'm still not really high on this effect. Like, it has a bit of a setup cost and not exactly a super high ceiling, but I don't know. It's cheap. It keeps you in the game. You get your card back out of it, and maybe you even get a little bit more if there's an ETB involved.
I think the first Undying Malice is pretty good in most like creature heavy decks. Okay. But I also don't think it's a card you really need to be taking this early.
Right. Flourishing Hunter, 4GG, 6/6. When it ETBs, you gain life equal to the greatest toughness among creatures you control. And it's a 6/6 itself, so usually you're gaining 6 life off of the dang thing.
This one I like. I've had very good results with Flourishing Hunter, so I'm in for first picking it, actually. The Honey Mammoth is in every set now, and in some sets it's very good. This is one of the sets where I think it's like near its best.
Definitely. This is a way to stabilize a board, and green gives you the mana ramp to play it a little earlier, too. Pointed Discussion is 2 and a black sorcery. You draw 2 cards, lose 2 life, then create a blood token.
This is one of the cards that has impressed me the most compared to like where it started. I think I'd still take the Flourishing Hunter, but honestly, I think it's close. Mm-hmm. I think this card is really good. And honestly, all it needed to sell me on it was like, oh, wait, this is kind of like Sift.
Yeah.
But it also works on all your synergies, and cast it for 3 initially. Blood has played out in a pretty satisfying fashion, and Point of Discussion is part of that. Plus, I think that red-black is the overall best deck, so I really don't mind starting with a black card.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I think when you look at a card like this, you think of like a control deck, right? You're like, well, can I run a card that draws me cards for relatively cheap but makes me lose 2 life and still expect to survive? And the answer is no, but that's also not where this card belongs. You put this in the aggressive decks as a way to reload and get a blood token because you often have synergies for that as well. There's another card we'll talk about later that's similar. So kind of interesting, but these cards are the ones that are good when you're beating down. You don't want to run too many of them, but a well-timed pointed discussion can really reload you and even let you cast like a 2-drop after it or something like that. Militia Rallier. This is the 2 and a white 3/3 that can't attack alone. And whenever it attacks you, untap a creature.
This is filler. It's playable in your aggressive white decks, but sometimes it'll get stranded and you'll be pretty unhappy about that. So I think it's just an okay card.
Blood Servitor, 3 mana 2/2. When it ETBs, you make a blood token. I have not found this card to be worth the.
No, I think you can do better than this. Yeah. There's enough ways to generate blood if that's what your deck's into that you don't have to stoop to playing this.
Yeah, that's the bottom line, right? It's just you can do better at 3. Binding Geist. This is the 2 and a blue 3/1. Whenever it attacks, target creature an opponent controls gets -2/-0 until end turn, and you can disturb it back onto a creature and it gives a creature -2/-0.
I think it's solid. I've been pretty happy with Binding Geist if you're in a deck that's interested in attacking. It's not better than Cruel Witness if you want to take a blue card, and I wouldn't take it over Pointed Discussion or Flourishing Hunter. So not really in the running for me.
Yeah, so it means it's playable, but not really good. All right, uncommons. First one's nice, actually. It's Screaming Swarm. This card's been good. 6 mana, 4/4 flyer. Whenever you attack with 1 or more creatures, target player mills that many cards, and you can put this for 2 and a blue. You can put Screaming Swarm from your graveyard into your library, second from the top. I've liked that card actually.
Oh, it's really good. It's a hard to kill 4/4 because it comes back. Milling both them and you, like both of those come up. I will always remember that we missed that it could mill yourself in the set review. Talked about it like right after we finished talking about the card, like right as we started the next card. But that was enough time for like a reasonable amount of people to pause the show and then go tweet at us. So, as I guess things happen. So,
do you think it's aptly named?
Yes, it is indeed. That's kind of how I felt. I felt like all these things were screaming at me. But no, the card's quite good. This would be my pick right now. I think that this card is very strong. Also, I have barely splashed in this format. I don't think you really should splash much, but it is splashable if you're into that sort of thing.
Yep, and especially if you're self-milling or something. Next one is Angelic Quartermaster. This is the 3 white 3/3 flyer. And when it ETBs, you put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 other target creatures.
Oh, this is probably what I would take. Angelic Quartermaster has been awesome.
It's very strong, yeah. And it asks a little bit less of you than the Screaming Swarm. Basically, this is the type of card that is perfect curve topper for an aggro deck. So I don't really, this is what you want in a format like this. I would definitely be looking at this card until we get to the next one. Ballista Watcher, 2 red, 4/3. You can pay 2 and a red and tap it to have it deal 1 damage to any target. But if it becomes night, it becomes a 5/5, and that 2 and a red becomes just 2 and a red, no tapping anymore. And you can just start throwing around damage like that. And a creature dealt damage this way can't block this turn. I have loved this card. I would take it.
Ballista Squad has been obscene. So I would certainly take Ballista Squad. Also, I think red's the best color, and if not red, it's black. So, one of those 2 colors, and Ballista Squad, I think, fits very nicely into there.
Yeah, this is like a heck of a pack here. Our rare is Hiveheart Shaman. This is the 3 and a green 3/5. And when it attacks, you can search your library for a basic land card that doesn't share a land type with a land you control and put it onto the battlefield and then shuffle. And then you can pay 5 and a green to make a 1/1 green insect token and put X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control, and you can only do that at sorcery speed. Where are you at with this?
I think I'd still just take the Ballista Watcher. Seems like starting there is a little stronger.
This is close, though. The Hiveheart Shaman, it's a 3/5 for 4, so that's already good just on stats. It's also particularly good when you're getting beaten down. You can just drop this thing on 4, and there's very few things that are bigger than it. And it gives you a pretty unstoppable late game. Like, even if, you only have 2 basic land types, you're paying 6 mana for 3/3s. And if you do happen to have an extra one in there, like we talked about on the set review, if you are splashing or whatever, all of a sudden you're making 4/4s for 6 mana. And that's really tough to overcome. It completely breaks a board stall. Like, there's a lot to like about Hiveheart Shaman, man, but Ballista Watcher has just been such a performer for me. Like, I'd be really tempted to still just take the Ballista Watcher.
I guess to clarify, at this point in the format, I would take the Hiveheart Shaman just to get more experience with the card.
Okay.
I suspect Ballista Watcher is slightly better.
Okay. Yeah, super, super close. I think if this was my pick, I would take Ballista Watcher at this point. But the one thing that I'm not 100% sure about with Hiveheart Shaman, mainly just because I can't remember, is I've played against it a few times, but I've been playing sealed and draft, and I can't remember if it was draft or sealed that I was playing against. You know, a card like Hiveheart Shaman and sealed, I think would be a pretty, I would take it over the Ballista Watcher. I mean, obviously there's no taking here, but you know what I mean? If I had the choice between the two. So there could be a difference there. That's how close these picks are. That's a good pack. Wow. Why don't I get these packs when I'm drafting them? All right, let's open up another one here and see what we get. All right, we've got Repository Scob as our first card out. This is a 3 and a blue 3/3 with exploit. You can return an instant or sorcery from your graveyard to your hand.
Yeah, we'll talk about it a little more in depth, but in the format overview. But I just don't think exploit is a very good strategy to go into, and it's unfortunate because Repository Scob looks like a sweet, powerful build around. You know, getting back your cool removal spells or your Scattered Thought seems like a good engine. I've just been really disappointed with my results when I've played these cards, so I would look to not be taking Repository Scob under most circumstances.
I agree. Like you said, we can go more into depth, but bottom line for me is that exploit has felt very clunky. Very, 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 very clunky. Next is Vampire Slayer. This is the 1 and a white 2/2. Whenever it deals damage to a vampire, you destroy that creature.
Like usual, it's a 2-mana 2/2 if you need a 2-mana 2/2, and that's about right where it ends.
Filler. Blood Petals Celebrant. This is the 1 and a red 2/1 that has first strike as long as it's attacking, and when it dies, you get a blood token. This card's been good.
Yeah, it's a solid card. It's
nice
actually
little 2-drop.
Performed a little worse than I thought it would, but that's because it looked very good to me. Mm-hmm. It turns out it's still pretty good, but I think it's just okay.
Yeah, just fine. Wretched Throng. This is the 1 and a blue 2/1, and when it dies, you can search your library for a card named Wretched Throng, reveal it, put it in your hand, and then shuffle. I mean, I have not done the Wretched Throng thing. I have had an opponent have one, it died, they searched up one, and then they were out. It was like whatever. And I haven't played it myself yet.
I've had 3 a couple times, and it's fine. It's worth playing. It just gives you like a pretty cheap 2-drop that, or a pretty like reasonably sized 2-drop that gives you more value. So nothing really to complain about here. But again, I'm not really looking to first pick one of these anyway, and especially not given the fact that I think blue is the weakest color by a decent margin.
Yeah, none of these cards I would be even remotely happy to first pick. Pointed Discussion is next. That one's in the lead now. Rural Recruit. This is a 3 and a green 1/1 with training, and it comes with a 3/1 boar.
Well, speaking of disappointing mechanics, training has been awful.
Yeah, I've had not a great time with training.
Don't think you want to be drafting around training. Like, I'm not saying all the cards with training are every single one is bad. It's just not really a cohesive big strategy, and most of the cards of training are just operate worse than you think they will. So I'm on Pointed Discussion right now.
Same. You know, we'll talk about training a little bit more. Actually, we'll save it for that. Sanctify is 1 and a white sorcery. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. You gain 3 life. I have yet to play a Sanctify even out of the sideboard. Yeah. Daybreak Combatants. This is the 2 and a red 2/2 with haste, and when it ETBs, target creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn. I've been down on this. Should I not be? Like, is this card fine?
It's fine. It's not exciting, but it's also like untyped in the sense that
it's not a wolf. Yeah.
It's not a wolf or a vampire. So
yeah.
It misses on 2 of the like tribes that care about types. So yeah, not a card I'm like thrilled to play, but you can definitely lose to that card.
Here's Drogskull Infantry. This is the 1 and a white 2/2 with Disturb for 3 and a white, and it becomes an aura that gives a creature +2/+2.
This is very good. I think Drogskull Infantry is one of the reasons that the blue-white deck, I think, is actually doing pretty well. It ends up just brawling early. They have to trade off. Then late, you end up in the situation where your opponent, if they attack into it, you can then just put it on your flyer and clock them back. So sometimes they just can't even attack into Drogskull, the infantry.
Yeah, that's exactly how it's played out for me as well. Solid 2-drop for the deck. And you almost always feel like when you disturb it back, you can get more than just +2/+2, like it's on a flyer, it's on a lifelink, or it's on something maybe in with double strike or whatever. And that there's a lot of that around, so the infantry goes up a bit there as well. Okay, that's it for the comments. So what are we taking here? Pointed Discussion?
I think that infantry is probably a better first pick than point of discussion.
Okay, so one of those two.
I wouldn't actually fault you for taking discussion.
Oh man, I love this card. Brambleworm. 6 and a green, 7/6 reach trample that gains you 5 life when it ETBs, and you can even pay 2 and a green and exile it from your graveyard to gain 5 more life.
Yeah, I have definitely lost to this card.
Yeah, it is underperformed a little relative to how good it could be.
I would probably still take Drogskol Infantry first here.
Yeah,
you can just draft such a nice little lean blue-white deck. I don't know. I'm pretty into that. And black-white's not far behind, and black-white also uses the infantry nicely.
Yeah, there is no world where I don't take Brambleworm here, but admittedly, this isn't one of those things where it's like, I know it's bad and I'm going to take it. This is just one of those things where it's like, you need quite a few things to happen to make it really good. Like, you need to ramp it out realistically. And then on top of it, starting with the green card, it's like kind of middle of the pack. Like, I don't have it as like the worst color, but it's not in the top 2. So a bit worse there, but I am definitely taking it because I love that card. Man, this card sucks. We should talk about this on our cards, or we can do it now. Cartographer's Survey, 3 and a green sorcery. Look at the top 7 cards of your library. Put up to 2 land cards from among them onto the battlefield, tapped, and the rest on the bottom in a random order. Why? Like, I saw some Twitter discussion about why this is so great, like the design, and I'm just like, this card's horrible. Like, I can't even reliably fix my colors with it, and I'm paying freaking 4 mana at sorcery speed. Like, yeah, I mean, it's not good at getting your like splash land or anything like that. And we did the numbers right. There's like a 10% chance that you don't hit 2 lands. Like, yeah, it's what? This is for constructed, I would imagine, because people play a lot of non-basics there. Okay. But I don't think the card is good. I think you should. I also don't think the ramp strategies are that great either. So there's really multiple reasons why I don't think that you should be playing Cartographer's Survey. I like the 2/3 guy. I think that card's fine. Like, that's kind of where I want my extra mana to come from, and of course the uncommon, but the 1/2. Distracting Geist. This is the 2 and a white 2/1, and whenever it attacks, tap target creature defending player controls, and it disturbs for 5 mana for 4 and a white, and it enchants a creature, and the creature has whenever this attacks, tap target creature defending player controls. I like Distracting Geist. I would take it over Drogskol Infantry. It's a really brutal card, especially when paired with other bounce spells or anything like that. And the flashback is actually quite effective in the right spot. Okay, so you're on Distracting Geist here. We've got another uncommon. This one's a foil, and it's Alluring Suitor. This is the 2 and a red 2/3, and when you attack with exactly 2 creatures, you transform it into Deadly Dancer, which is a 3/3 trampler, and when it transforms, you get 2 red mana that doesn't drain as steps and phases end, and you can pay double red to have Deadly Dancer and another target creature each get +1/+0 until end of turn. This card's been awesome. Yeah, I would certainly take Alluring Suitor here. Yeah, definitely windmilling Alluring Suitor. This card's just been so sweet. May I have this done? We do have a rare. It's Old Ruststein. This is 1 black-green for a 1/4 legendary human. When it enters a battlefield or at the beginning of your upkeep, mill a card. If it was a land card, you get a treasure. If it was a creature, you get a 1/1. And if it's a non-creature, non-land, you get a blood token. I think Old Ruststein's probably the most powerful card in the pack. Like, you generate a lot of stuff. It might not be exactly what you want, but you generate a lot of stuff. You do. But I wouldn't take it. No, I think I would just take the Alluring Suitor, start monocolor rather than gold, because I don't think that the power level differential between those 2 cards is that big. I don't either, and I have not seen black-green be amazing. I have seen it do its thing, the toughness thing, and that can be really good. Yeah, but on average, it feels like this is almost always true for black-green. It feels like a pile of cards. It feels like, hey, that's a good card. Hey, you got another good card. But it never. I will say this is a pile of cards format. Yeah. True. That's true. Actually, yeah. But at least, so, it's interesting because that can bring us, as we both pick the dancer there, that can bring us into our format overview in a bigger picture. So let's talk about it like that. Pile of cards format. When I think of that, I retreat right from the normal, like, I'm going for synergy to I'm going for a good curve. I'm going for a solid game plan. I'm trying to get my opponent dead relatively quickly. that seems to be what I've had the most success with in this format as well.
Yeah. I want to talk about kind of where we're at on this format, and because this has been a pretty frequent topic of discussion, right? If you look at kind of like the subreddit or Twitter or just people's streams, like, and it's like, is this format good? Is it bad? I think this format sucks. I think this format's okay. I don't like this about the format. And I did want to weigh in on the format because I think it's something that, you know, it's good to kind of let our listeners know where we're at. I think that's a great place to be. Mm-hmm. And to some degree, and this is the part that I think is tricky, people look to us to determine a little like, oh, what do I think about the format? Mm-hmm. Here's my concern. So here's kind of like where I hesitate a little bit. I don't want, like, whatever I feel about the format, I don't want that to negatively impact your enjoyment of the format. Mm-hmm. Because I've seen this sentiment expressed of like, man, everyone says this format sucks, but I've been enjoying it. What am I getting wrong? And it's like, absolutely nothing. Mm-hmm. You like the format. Like that should be basically the end of the story. If you're enjoying it, you're enjoying it. I mean, when I saw people say, oh, I don't like, Midnight Hunt because blue and black are too good or Esper colors are too good, I can be like, yeah, that's great. That's a valid reason not to like it. I really like the format. I did 100 drafts, like mm-hmm. That's how I felt. I will tell you, I do not particularly like this format. I've got some criticisms of it that really do impact my enjoyment. One is that like the amount of ridiculous rares, I think, is at a high percentage. Actually, when I did I did a deep dive on sealed. I did a bunch of sealeds for Channel Fireball, and I wrote out, here's all the rares and mythics that I would try very hard to play in my deck if you opened them. And I'm mm-hmm. not saying these are all the good ones. These are all like the best ones. Mm-hmm. And I got to 22 out of 84.
Holy crap. So wow, I thought you were going to say 9 or 10, and I was going to be like, wow, that's a lot.
No, that's more than a quarter of them. Slightly
22.
More. But,
oh my God.
And again, that's not, there are 22 good rares and mythics. No, there's like another 10 or 15 that are good. I'm saying there's 22 that you can't leave on your sideboard, like, Ulvenwald Oddity and Avabrook Caretaker and Sorin and, Wedding Announcement and Hullbreaker Horror or Cemetery Desecrator. We're talking best of the best. Dreadfeast Demon, mm-hmm. And like a lot of these are rares, not even mythics. And that sort of thing, the main complaint that people have about like the preponderance of like really strong rares is it invalidates a lot of what else goes on. Like I've had games like that. I mean, if you watch my stream today, you were watching, Marshall. I mm-hmm. had this game. We both played some cards, and then they played a Dreadfeast Demon on turn 7. I just conceded.
Yes. And you know how often that happens? I was watching Woody play sealed, and he had one, and it's like every time you play it and you make the copy, they just scoop. Game's over.
Yeah. And Toxrill, right? The slug that just shrinks their whole team and makes a bunch of slugs. Like there's just a lot of these cards. And I think that once you hit a certain threshold, it actually does start to take away enjoyment because of how often the game just comes down to someone playing one of these cards. And really what actually I think kind of rubs it in this format is the 4-mana ones. The Anji made of Dishonor, and then like Alana and or Halana and Alina partners, like the 4-mana 2/3 that puts 2 +1/+1 counters immediately. Like these are cards that cost 4 mana, Ulvenwald Oddity, that come pretty close to ending the game, or at least making it so the game's completely about them. And then that's, of course, coupled with the fact that I think the removal in the set mostly is inefficient. There's just not that much good removal. And that's fine. I don't think that's necessarily something that's going to make or break a set. But the removal being kind of bad, the rares being kind of good, and then the synergy stuff not working as well as generally playing good cards. There's some exceptions. Like the Blood deck, I think, works out really nicely. Yeah. I enjoy playing those decks a lot. But the training deck doesn't, the exploit deck doesn't. I don't think the life gain deck is that much of a thing. I think black and white is good, and you can get some good like pockets of synergy, but a black-white like life gain deck isn't really how it's played out. No,
it is about specific cards, having the uncommon, whatever. Same thing with Disturb, by the way. It's been okay.
Yeah, I mean, the blue-white flyer strategy is good, and it uses some Disturb cards, but it's not. I don't feel like you're drafting this highly synergistic deck.
No.
And this all adds up. And then combined with the fact that I think the aggressive starts are really hard to stop, especially since the removal is bad. And a lot of the games just don't play out in a way that I find very fun. And so you end up in a spot where I think that this is a really good example of why something I consistently say is I care about, fun more than balance. I think that this is a much more balanced format than Midnight Hunt. Mm-hmm. The color balance is much better in this format.
Yeah, there's no runaway color pair. No, like at this point in the show for last set, you and I were like blue, black, blue, black, blue, black.
Let's do a deep dive on blue, black.
Yeah.
I think that red, black and red, green are the two best color pairs, but they're not like to the point where you can't draft other things. And I think that blue is the worst color, but it's not like you can't draft blue. I, draft blue a decent amount of the time. What kind of ends up happening is the balance is there, but the fun is not for me where it's like, I just don't find the games to be quite as fun as a lot of the more recent formats. We're talking Kaldheim, we're talking, Strixhaven, Midnight Hunt, not AFR. If I had to rank them, AFR is lower than this. Mm-hmm. I think AFR was I really didn't enjoy AFR. I'm still enjoying this format. And that's the thing. Mm-hmm. It's still a draft format. I like draft formats. I like drafting. I had a good time doing the 2 drafts on my stream today. We got to play a lot of games. They were good games. It just ended up being pretty fun. That said, I've done a lot of drafts and I know I'm enjoying this less than some of the more recent formats. So in conclusion, I would say this format's probably around a 4 out of 10 for me. Okay. And
so a little below, and 5 would be average for you?
Right now, they're averaging about a 7 out of 10.
Right. I'm saying it on this scale, 5 is actually, because, a lot of times people view it 7 out of 10 as average.
5 out of 10 is I guess, yes, average overall. I would say I found Midnight Hunt to be about a 9 or 8 or a 9 for me. Mm-hmm. Kaldheim and Strixhaven were probably 7s or 8s. AFR was a 2. Mm-hmm. This is still a pretty, pretty well below average set. The fact that I'm having fun with it now doesn't change that, but it's tricky. What I don't want the result of this to be is for a lot of people to think Luis said the format sucks. I guess he's right. Maybe I shouldn't play this because it's still fun. We're having draft opens in this format. I'm going to go play them,
Right.
And I'm going to enjoy them. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, yeah. I wanted to ask you about this. So, cause you mentioned this at the top there, but I am curious. So, I think that, for you and I who do podcasts about this stuff, right, we need to have kind of 2 gears, right? And I think we do this a lot, on the Sunset shows, for example. One of them is, what do I like? Right. But the other one is, what is good? Objectively so, right? For example, you can go see a movie, right? And you could say, this type of movie doesn't really appeal to me, right? But I can definitely recognize that it was really well made. It was well crafted. The acting was really good. They hit the points they wanted to hit and it had a great ending, right? I personally wouldn't go see it again, but if I was to rate it as objectively as I could, right? And I understand that there's biases that we can't really get out of our head, but hey, I can try. I might give it an 8 or a 9 out of 10, but I might tell you I'm never going to watch it again. I hated it. It scared me, or, it made me really sad, or it had a dog that died in it and I don't want to watch a movie like that or whatever, right? But that's completely personal to me, right? I'm telling you, I didn't like the movie. I'm not telling you it was a bad movie. So where are you kind of on that scale here? Are you just saying this isn't an LSV format, or are you saying, no, this format actually is, average to a little below average?
I think this format is below average.
Okay.
I believe it's not just me. I know it's not just me.
It's not just you, no.
The whole tenor of the conversation is a lot of people saying this format sucks.
Yes.
And again, I think it's more nuanced than that. It's not just
okay.
The end of the story isn't this format sucks,
That's good.
Put a sock in it, it's done or whatever.
Yeah, but your point is, just because that is the conclusion that you came to doesn't mean that other people can't enjoy it, right? It's totally.
Yeah, it doesn't mean
it doesn't even mean that you're not enjoying it. Yeah.
Drafting is one of the things I enjoy most just in my life.
Yeah.
A bad draft format's still a lot more fun than a lot of things I could be doing. Mm-hmm. Part of the reason I don't watch much TV is because I enjoy drafting, or playing Storybook Brawl a lot more than most TV shows. Mm-hmm. By the way, if you haven't watched Arcane, the League of Legends show, amazing, extremely good. Okay. You should watch it. Okay. You don't have to watch League of Legends.
Is this the one that people were saying that they need to get the people that did that to make a Magic show or whatever? Okay.
Yes, it is exactly how you make that show.
Okay.
Anyways, if a Magic made a show like that, it'd be game over. But where I'm at, like, because look, there's some pressure, and we can both acknowledge this, right? There's some pressure as content creators to not say something sucks.
Yep.
Because for multiple reasons. One is that, like, you don't want Wizards to get mad at you. I'm not too worried about that, because the folks at Wizards, they get praise from me when they do things that are great, and I want that to mean something, which also means if I don't think something's great, I think I should say it. And then, but the other thing is, like, you don't want to dissuade people from, like, watching your stream or listening to LR or doing something that's not drafting. But I also think it would be a disservice if we don't mention, like, hey, this format, hasn't been getting the highest marks. There's a lot of people unhappy with this format. Let's dive into that. And I've tried to give you some reasons why I think the format is suffering.
That's
like
good.
what and so end of the day, you should do what you find to be fun. I do find it fun to play this format. I'm still going to continue to play the format. I bet when I stream, it'll mostly be draft, because draft's the best way to play Magic.
Yeah.
But it is but I feel it coming off of Midnight Hunt, which I really loved, and the fact that this is going to be around for like a month longer than Midnight Hunt, which is kind of a brutal set of timing for where we're at.
Yeah, and I wanted to give my take on it too, because I think that a lot of the people listening will have a similar sense of it, which is, it takes me a little longer to kind of form a bigger picture opinion. I know that in the podcast, content creation game, it's all about like having takes and like getting your opinion out there and stuff. But I've always been a little more cautious with it rather than jumping too early on, slamming the door on things. And, I know that means that I don't give like the super hot Twitter takes as often as some other people that do. But also I think that the stuff that I do say tends to hold up a little better over time. And my feeling in the format early, and this is the part that I think a lot of people at home will probably go, yeah, I get what you're saying, which is I feel like I can't quite get settled in it. I can't quite find a home. I don't quite have a deck or a strategy that I go to, that makes me feel like, okay, there's meat on this bone. It's like when stuff works for me, I'm like, okay, maybe that was good, but also maybe I just happen to get a good version of that deck and I won't ever have it again. I don't want to put too much emphasis on any one deck that I have. And then, when something doesn't work well, similar feelings, I'm like, well, that wasn't really great, but maybe I just didn't build it right. Or maybe there's a card or an interaction that I'm not emphasizing enough. I don't want to, plant my flag on that this archetype stinks. And of course, I'm also paying attention to what my opponents are doing. So for me, it's more broad strokes, right? Which is some of the stuff that we've already talked about and I want to get into here. I found that the nature of we were speculating on if this would be the first Prince format in quite a while. And it is. I feel that there's a take. There's your hot take. It really feels that way. The combination of bombs being not only great, but also having either uninteractable or very short window to interact with. In combination with the fact that the removal is fairly nerfed here means that that's a really deadly combination for ending games and having that feeling that Luis described, that where it's like the things I did in this game didn't matter. And that is not good. That is what you don't want that at all. If somebody plays a big bomb, but there's plenty of answers for them, and maybe they get some type of enter the battlefield trigger, they get some value off of it, but you kill it and the game carries on. And if you don't kill it, you do lose to it. That's sort of the acceptable bar, I think, for like the top level bombs for us. But if they cast it and let's say they play that demon against you, they make a copy of it, and you have a removal spell in your hand, but you either don't have the mana or it's sorcery speed and the game's just over. People don't like that. The green hexproof one is just like, this is stupid, right? As you mentioned, the 4-drop ones that can come down, and kind of make the game over before you really can get to your 6 mana removal spell or whatever. That's too tough as well. But it also has a bigger effect on the format that I've seen and that I've tried to kind of adjust to, which is, look, if you're going to try to cast a 6 or 7 mana card that I can't beat, I'm going to just try to beat you before that card matters, right? So now I'm trying to get my curve lower. I'm trying to turn my creature sideways. I'm trying to use combat tricks and removal to get blockers out of the way. And I'm trying to kill you before you get to 6 mana, 7 mana, or maybe you play your bomb, but then I can kill you the next turn or bounce it and kill you. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with having a format that is leaned towards that. But I have to say that the conclusion that I come to, or that I'm coming to in the early stages here, is that the end result of that is you leave a lot of really cool, interesting stuff on the shelf. So, things like the exploit deck, which has a lot of cool interactions and a lot of stuff going on, just feel too clunky and slow if you're just getting slammed on because, you don't want to get beaten by a bomb or whatever. Stuff like training. Yeah, you'd think that would like flourish in an aggressive format, but it turns out that it just does nothing if you have to block, and the creatures are all really small. So if you are in a race situation, like, you better be able to win that race. And if you can't, you do not have another option. You can't be like, well, I'll just block and trade. It's like, well, none of your cards trade. Sorry. They are built to attack and that's it. So then the whole training thing just kind of gets wiped away, and then if you look at some of the cuter stuff like toughness matters and that type of stuff, that takes a while to get set up and it starts to fall away. And all of a sudden, a lot of the things, self-mill, LOL, right? Like, I haven't seen anybody win anything with green blue like that. There's no spider spawning here, to note. And, those type of things are what end up suffering in my mind because things get kind of pushed to the extremes. You're either trying to be really fast or you're trying to set up for your big bomb. And that doesn't leave a lot of room in the middle. And it's a shame.
Yeah. And to add on to this, because I didn't cover it, yes, I agree that aggro is a good way to beat these bombs, but I also think that there's a lot of good anti-aggro stuff in the format that makes it, like the 2/3 lifelink, for example. Yeah. That makes it hard to actually get under a lot of these. Plus, a lot of the bombs cost like 4 mana. Yeah. How are you getting under that?
Yeah, and you're definitely not getting under that. The other thing we should talk about here is the removal, right? It has been nerfed enough here so that it can't keep up. It's really interesting because, cards that keep coming up for me over and over again is Bleed Dry, right? This is the premium removal spell of the format, right? It's 2 black, -13, and you exile the thing if it dies. Basically, it permanently deals with anything on the battlefield. And, I've already had situations come up where, like, I opened up one of those in a Hero's Downfall. And I'm already going, normally I would just default to the Hero's Downfall. They're similar enough cards that you just much prefer the cheaper option. But already I'm like, the exile might actually matter here. Like, should I just be taking Bleed Dry? And Bleed Dry is like really the only thing that kind of answers everything, right? Like, the white removal spell that kills a tapped creature or for 6 mana kills a not tapped, really easy to play around. It's just been like face up. It felt like every single time I've played against it. And the fact that it costs 6 if you don't play into it is just another one of those things where they get to have their bomb for a while. And man, I have felt like an extreme emphasis to take Bleed Dry, like at all costs kind of, because it feels like the only place I can go to kind of shield myself from the bomb potential.
Yeah. I think that, we've kind of weighed in on the format. Let's talk about kind of how it's breaking down from a strategy perspective.
Okay. What do you want to talk about first?
So I think let's talk about some of the archetypes that are good, because as we said, training and exploit aren't great, which really makes the colors that are heavy in those, like, for example, green-white for training or blue-black for exploit, weaker than they would be otherwise. Because it doesn't mean, like, I think black's a great color, even though exploit's one of its mechanics. It doesn't mean the color's not still good. But of course, when one of your mechanics isn't good, your color is going to be weaker, as a result.
Mm-hmm. And again, I want to reinforce what you said earlier. This doesn't mean unplayable. No. You can play a blue-black exploit deck and you can win your draft with it. It's just on the weaker end of the spectrum. Okay, go ahead.
So it's funny that it was in this set, not the last one, but red-green werewolves, quite good.
They're actually good now. It's incredible.
Yeah, I think it's the combination of having some more actual powerful werewolves, like Child of the Pack is just like a very strong werewolf.
Which one is that?
That's the red-green gold card, the 2/5.
Yeah. That card's dope.
But even like Hookhand Hunter or whatever, the 4-mana 4/4 that flips to a 6/4, like it just was missing those, plus a good suite of removal, with the Wolf Strike and like a Braid and Fire Blessed, Flame Blessed Bolt, like just ways to interact that are pretty good. And then Flourishing Hunter, the 6-mana 6/6, which just gains you 4 to 6 life when you play it, means that these decks can be kind of good on both sides of the court. So plus like Pack Song Pup, the uncommon, is really strong. Like I had a deck with 2 of those earlier and it was just great. And actually Snarling Wolf makes the cut. It actually works out.
Yeah, it gets that wolf count up high enough.
the combination of slightly better removal, worse removal on the other colors. Like, it's not like you're getting all your werewolves just completely dunked on by this great removal, where the other colors have tons of great options. And then some actual decent wolf synergies and good werewolves, all of a sudden you got a deck. So definitely a fan of red-green werewolves. And then my favorite deck in terms of like how it plays out is the red-black blood deck, because it's a vampire deck, but you don't always care about whether your cards have the creature type vampire. Like, that doesn't matter a ton.
That actually seems a little de-emphasized. It's just more about blood. And then those ones usually have that. But yeah, it's not as much tribal as much about blood.
You got some rares that care about it, but that's mostly it. There's uncommon, like the Markov Retribution or whatever. But what you're trying to do with this deck is you're kind of like a mid-range deck, but on the side of aggression. Like, you're more likely to be aggro than mid-range. And you generate a lot of blood tokens. You have synergies with those. You have slight like overlap with life gain synergies, and you have access, of course, to the best removal. That's what red and black do. They get Abrade, they get Flame Blessed Bolt, they get Bleed Dry, and they're able to kill, even Grisly Ritual is a fine way to kill things. And then the blood really makes it consistent with not flooding out and, having kind of like the right mix of lands and spells, or finding access to specifically what it needs. A big key with this deck is like trying to keep it, like, one of the reasons I try not to play Grisly Ritual is I want to have a deck that doesn't have to play land number 6, that at 5 lands can stop playing lands and then just can discard lands number 6, 7, 8 to the blood tokens without having to worry about, drawing a 6-drop.
Oh, that's cool.
And then this deck ends up being, a deck that can pressure the opponent and then use blood to outspell them in like the mid to late game. So definitely a good deck. And definitely has a lot of the 2 best colors with a lot of the like best removal spells, with this like kind of card smoothing mechanism, which is something that these decks sometimes lack. Sometimes red-black falls behind because you just sit there and you're like, well, I've got a bunch of 1-for-1s, but then I flood out. But the blood deck just really doesn't do that. So I like how this deck plays out quite a bit. And then Blue-White Spirits is another one. This is like an aggressive deck that's trying to play a bunch of flyers, trying to it's not like it's using the disturb cards. Like Lantern Bearer, is fantastic. Drogskull Infantry is fantastic. It's not really using them in like, hey, I'm going to get clever and discard or self-mill them quite as much. It's mostly like, I cast these creatures. At some point, you have to either deal with them or I chump, and then I flash them back for value while just pressuring you with flyers and, spells that like bounce or tap down or what have you. So I've been getting pretty good results with blue-white. What have you been liking in the format? Besides, I know you like red-green and red-black.
Yeah, I like red-green and red-black the most. And then the other deck that I just wanted to highlight that I think that there's some good potential and that I actually have done pretty well with is white-black life gain. You described it correctly. It is not like a fully synergistic package, but there are enough 1-2 punches within the life gain setup that does something that I think is really what you should be looking for early, which is taking advantage of cards that nobody else wants, right? So a card that's performed well is Traveling Minister, right? That's a card that white decks are going to want to play. That's the white 1/1, and you can tap it to give a creature +1/+0 and you gain a life at sorcery speed. So that's fine. People are going to play that card. But if you put that in conjunction with a card like, for example, Courier Bat, this is a nice little combo. Nobody wants Courier Bat. This is the 2 and a black 2/2 flyer, and when it ETBs, you can return a creature from your graveyard to your hand, but only if you've gained life this turn. So you need to be able to turn that on, where you can gain some life. So you either need a lifelinker that's going to trade, or you need the ability to play like a courier that can do it. And this is where you can wheel Courier Bats all day. There's not another deck that really cares about them. And then there's also Desperate Farmer as well, which is 2 and a black 2/2 lifelink. And if another creature you control dies, it becomes a 4/3 lifelink as well. So there's good ways to trigger the card. And a card like Courier Bat to me is that sweet spot of, it's a very good card if it grave digs, back something every time. You would play that all day long. But if it doesn't, then it's actually a bit below par. But in this deck, you can set it up so that that's actually a good card, and you can get them later because nobody else wants them. And there's a few little synergies like that. But I will say that the reason that I agree with the way that Luis described the deck earlier, where it's somewhere in that kind of pile of good cards range, is because you really do need to put together these 1-2 punches to make the deck work. And if you can't, it is very medium. It's just sort of a mid-range pile. Markov Purifier is the gold uncommon for it. It's the 1 black, white, 2/3 lifelinker. And at the beginning of your end step, if you gain life this turn, you can pay 2 and draw a card. You know, that's the type of card that can take over the game that absolutely must be killed, but only if you have like a courier or some way to peck in to get the life gain going from, you know, what the 1/4 that when you sack a blood token, it gains you a life, or there's all these little ways to do it, but you do need them. So it ends up being a little bit uncommon centric, because if you can get those really good uncommons, there's a lot of support for them. But if you don't, the deck doesn't naturally come together. That said, I see potential for it. I also like where it sits in the format, where it is actually decent against the aggro decks, because you are going to gain a bunch of life and put down life linkers and stuff like that. That just kind of makes their life difficult, where if they're trying to mise you out with a combat trick to kill you or whatever, that's not going to end up working. And you get access to decent enough removal in this color pair that you still may be able to deal with a bomb. If it resolves and the game goes long, which you're kind of lead. This would be, you know how we called the red black deck mid-range, but leaning towards aggro. This is mid-range, but leaning a little in the other direction. Like this is a little more towards the grindy end of the spectrum rather than the aggressive one. That said, I have seen things come together enough that makes me think that this deck, could be real. But I don't have it on the same level as red, green, and red, black.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think that it's slightly more controlling, though obviously you can have aggressive draws thanks to all the white cards.
Yeah.
But you do end up with this kind of grindy style of deck that ends up, I think, performing pretty well with these like a good amount of synergy but not a massive amount. It's not like the deck's all synergy, but when it comes together, it actually comes together pretty nicely.
It needed another common, like the courier that would kind of push it over the top, but it didn't have it. Let's bang through a few individual cards here, Luis, and then we'll talk about sealed. We'll just give quick thoughts on these because they were just some of the ones that came to mind. Voldaren Epicure, that's the red 1/1 that dings something when it ETBs.
It pings your opponent for 1 and gives you a blood token, and I have found this card to vastly exceed my expectations. I think it's actually a good card. I don't even think it's just like an okay card. I think it's a good one. It gives you a creature for exploit. It gives you a blood token at very low cost. It gets a little bit of extra damage through. It wears Ceremonial Knife, another card I'm very happy with, quite well. And overall, I think Voldaren Epicure is a card that I would just play multiples of in almost all my red decks. I just have been very impressed with the card. Okay,
let's talk about Ceremonial Knife.
Yes, that's the 1 mana, 2 to equip, +1/+0, and when it deals damage, not combat damage, but not just to a player, just when it deals combat damage to anything, you end up you getting a blood token, and it's a way to get a recurring source of blood tokens while making your creatures just a little bit stronger, a little bit better. And what's great about it is I actually frequently play multiples of this because if you draw 1, you can just loot away the rest with your blood tokens. You don't generally need 2 of these in play. It's
the Merfolk looter, backup plan that we used to have back in the day. You can always just loot away the extra ones. This also speaks to the red-black deck, right, in that it is a blood token deck, and it has plenty of ways to utilize blood tokens beyond just sacrificing them to augment your draw late in the game, which is good. Like, that's a nice thing to have. That's a thing. It's not the type of thing that puts the game over the top because you're not actually getting any card advantage out of it. You're getting card selection, but that's still useful. But really, it's the creatures that use these blood tokens. So, anything that makes repeatedly more and more blood tokens is going to be good in that deck.
I also really like it in the white decks, like white-blue.
Okay.
It goes very nicely on, like a Lantern Bearer or even like a Drogskull Infantry. And it can combine with other stuff to make it so your flyers just peck in for that much more. Plus, it's a way for the white-blue deck to not only, just sit on 4 or 5 lands and the rest spells, but also just sometimes you make plays like, discard my Twin Strike Geist to my blood token and then immediately cast the Disturb Fat.
Yeah, totally. So there you go.
I'm pretty high on Ceremonial Knife. I like it. I like it in the decks with small creatures, basically. I don't like it in red-green as much because those decks are big and the creatures are big enough that you don't really care about the +1/+0, and your mana is usually tied up. And I don't like it in like blue-black because you don't have that many creatures. But in decks like white-blue or red-black, it's, I think, quite strong and a card you really should be paying attention to.
Okay, another card that you should really, really be paying attention to if watching your stream has anything to say about it is Reckless Impulse.
Yes, it's a 1 in a red sorcery, exile your top 2 cards. You can play them until the end of your next turn. This is like a 2-mana draw 2. What you need to make it into a 2-mana draw 2 is basically play a deck that has a reasonably low curve and play a deck that doesn't have very many situational spells. Like, it's bad to flip pump spells to this, and it's unplayable to flip counter spells to this, just about. But, if you have a deck, and this is part of why I like Voldaren Epicure and Ceremonial Knife and Lantern Bearer and all these cheap cards. If you have a deck where you could, on like turn 4, basically you want to cast Reckless Impulse, the first turn you would miss a land drop. And like most card draw, it's best to cast it once you cast all your other stuff. But like what will often happen is you'll play like, land 2-drop, next turn land 3-drop, then turn 4 you don't have any lands in hand. You're like Reckless Impulse, hopefully hit a land and then play a spell. And if you have a low curve deck with all assertive cards, Reckless Impulse, again, 2-mana draw 2 is just a fantastic card.
Really good.
So
yeah, it reminds me of Expressive Iteration.
Yeah, this card is going to continue to go up in value based on. I've had 3 or 4 in my last couple of decks. It's just not going to happen, as the format goes on. People are going to realize this is a 2-mana divination, and they're going to adjust accordingly.
That's right. Yeah, you just need to give it that consideration that Luis said, just to build around it just enough. What about Lantern Bearer? That's the blue 1/1 flyer with Disturb for 2 and a blue, and then the creature gets flying, but it also gets +1/+1. They just kind of threw that on there.
Yeah, every point of stats matters, and basically, you can look at the end of this. I'm high on all the 1-drops. We've got 3 more 1-drops on the list after this one, because I think that the 1-drops are just really, really strong. And Lantern Bearer, it's great as like, part of an exploit deck. Like I'm not high on the exploit mechanic as like, I'm going to build my deck around this, but having 2 repository scobs in your deck is still fine. And Lantern Bearer gets sacrificed to them nicely. It wears equipment nicely, and even just chumps or trades and then flashes back on your 4/4 and just kills your opponent. Lantern Bearer is really good. I played almost as many as I can get, and it's a card that I think is going to continue to get drafted earlier and earlier.
What about Blood Fountain? That's the black artifact that makes a blood token, and you can pay 3 and a black and sack it to get back 2 creatures from your graveyard to your hand.
I like this one a lot. This one is not one I want in multiples usually, but having 1 just makes it so your black deck has a lot more punch in the late game. You're able to use this to get back, 2 strong creatures. And the fact that it has a blood token means you can often play this, discard a creature to that blood token, and then get 2 creatures back if you have like a somewhat creature light draw. So definitely a card that I like to have 1 of. It's just like almost every double Raised Dead variant in Limited these days, I almost always want 1 of.
Yeah.
It all just works out that way.
But you really do just want 1. Like these get really tough. Like 4 mana, you basically have to take a turn off to get your creatures back, and that can be really punishing. What about
Voldaren Epicure?
Yeah, there you go. What about Massive Might?
I had a deck that had 2 Epicures and a Blood Fountain, or 3 Epicures rather, and I got back Epicure a lot with that Blood Fountain because it let you play something the same turn.
Sounds like a party to me. Massive Might.
Massive Might is the green instant, give +2/+2 and trample. Again, 1-drops are just really good, and this format has a lot of going on in the like early to mid game. And Massive Might lets you double spell, but it's more than just that, because that part is good, right? You get to play this plus a 3-drop on turn 4, but also the trample really makes it so this is a card that has a lot more relevance in the late game than you might expect. You end up in spots where if they've got the Massive Might, I'm dead. I'm blocking their 6/6 with a 1/1, or hey, we're gonna make this combat. And you're gonna cast Massive Might. You're gonna kill my creature. I'm gonna take 4 damage.
Yep.
It's just a really effective card, and I like it more than basically all the other combat tricks.
Yeah, it's definitely the best of them. We talked about Snarling Wolf. The Wolves deck ends up being a lot more tribal, I think, than it felt before, where like some of the really good payoffs care about how many wolves or werewolves you have. There's the one that when one of them die, you draw a card if it gets to be nighttime. And then, of course, there's a 2-drop that gets bigger if you control a wolf or werewolf, and that's a kind of the dream curve here, Snarling Wolf into that guy. I've been playing them too. It just feels like you want critical massive wolves, and this is a fine way to do it.
Yeah, the wolf, it kind of gets the job done in a way that it did not in Midnight Hunt.
Yeah, which is funny because we kind of made fun of it, right, when we saw that it was getting reprinted. What about Brinecomber?
So this is the 1 blue white for a 1/1, and when it enters the battlefield or becomes the target of an aura, you get a 1/1 flyer, and then it has blue and a white disturb. So first of all, again, 3 mana for a 1/1 plus a 1/1 flyer is generally a good deal. Like that it's not an incredible deal, but it's a good deal. A 1/1 flyer plus a ground creature is fine. But the Disturb is 2 mana for that. So again, that now we're really talking, because we're talking 5 mana total for 2 1/1s and 2 1/1 flyers. But in the Disturb decks, because you're blue-white, right, you often are going to end up being able to just flash it back and target another thing, or target with another thing right away and get multiple 1/1 flyers. Brian Comer might not look like a lot, but I think the card is very good. I've been quite impressed with it.
Yeah, it's good. I found it to be solid. Honeymoon Hearse, you'd think that in a format that was aggressive like this, that a 2 and a red for a 5/5 trampler that happens to be a vehicle that you need 2 untapped creatures to crew it up would be good, but it has not been. I don't know if it's just too big of a commitment for the tap 2 untapped creatures to crew it up. Normally it like checks for power, but this is just like, it takes 2 to make this thing go. But I have not been impressed by the Honeymoon Hearse. Where are you at on it?
I don't tend not to play it. I think it's just okay.
Okay.
Like there are decks I could construct where I'd want it. It all comes back to Voldar and Epicure. But in decks with reasonable sized creatures, it's not very good. Trading 2 creatures into a 5/5 is not often an upgrade. You'd have to have a lot of really small creatures or ways to make tokens before the Honeymoon Hearse starts to really get appealing.
What about Glorious Sunrise? We had a good talk about that one on the set review. I think you gave it an A+ and I gave it an F-. Was that accurate?
I've been impressed with it. It's a card that I've lost to, and it's the kind of card. The reason I was high on that card, and the reason I still remain high, it's the kind of card when your opponent plays it, you feel like, man, I need to get this game over with, or I'm going to lose to this card. But the card also helps prolong the game and make it hard to actually do get that done. Yeah,
I agree. I think I would come down about where I came down on it. I have beaten this card when they didn't have the 3-powered creature, or if they were low on life, if they were remotely stable, it started to take over, and it's certainly beaten me, just like giving their team, +1/+1. I did even have somebody add 3 mana, which I found offensive. What about Boarded Window? This is a card that's very enticing, right? Like when I see this, I'm like, ooh, yeah. 3 mana artifact. Creatures attacking you get -1/-0. But at the beginning of your end step, if you were dealt 4 or more damage this turn, you exile it.
So this card's tricky because you really need to have the right setup for this card to be good enough.
Yeah.
Because it is a powerful card, but it's also a card that when it backfires is really bad.
It does just nothing.
Yeah, you're just down a card at that point.
Yeah.
So
I'm going, my current view on this, I've tried it a few times, is it's getting worse and worse for me. To the point that I think where I'm at right now is it's going to be a card that I don't see anymore because other people are going to take it higher. But if I do end up with one, I think I will consider sideboarding it in situations where I determine it to be particularly good. But otherwise, I don't think I'm going to be starting it unless I have a perfect build for it or something weird happens.
I just don't think the card is good. I think that
it's a bad card.
I think that you can sideboard it. I agree with you that that's the best place for it, because decks that go wide and have small creatures might have trouble, but you have to be controlling. They have to have small creatures. If they ever go like Lantern Bearer, one of my creatures, all of a sudden you just lose the boarded window. And then even like Abrade means that sometimes you end up in a spot where they abrade the window and just, your whole plan kind of falls apart. So I don't want to be too hard on the card because I still want the Lords Limited to play it against us when we do the showdown, but because they love this card. This is exactly up their alley. Sure. I don't think it's a card that you should be putting in your decks. And not to lean too heavily on it, but it's also one of the lowest win rates in the entire set on 17 lands.
Oh, is it really? Okay.
You win like 10% less when you cast this card.
Okay, so let's not play our boarded windows. Okay, let's do a quick run through on your thoughts on Sealed after having done your article on it and and I'll throw in my thoughts as well. Like I said, I think I did 4 or 5 Sealeds already as well, just sort of trying to get some under my belt for the tournament on the weekend. What are your thoughts on Sealed?
So the way I like to approach Sealed, and this is kind of how we do this when we do most Sealed episodes, is first I talk about some things that tend to be true about Sealed, but then I also want to like kind of hone in on how they're true in this format. Mm-hmm. And the biggest one probably is that Sealed is a little bit slower. So you're going to face fewer aggro decks. You're going to face, more expensive cards, more removal, more colors. Like most draft decks are going to be 2 colors. Most sealed decks in this format also 2 colors, but there will be more 3-color decks in sealed because you'll end up having an Evolving Wilds and a Foreboding Statue and want to splash your off-color bomb. And then speaking of bombs, this sealed in this format is just completely bomb dominated.
It is
Each
so
player
disgusting.
gets 6 packs.
It's so dumb.
On average, you should have slightly more than one of a must-play bomb in your pool. And here's kind of the key when it comes to approaching how you should build your deck. You should play that card. And that sounds obvious or foolish, but let me tell you, that actually goes against kind of how sealed was for a very long time, which was like, yes, you should try to play your best cards, but if your colors are too shallow, then maybe you just have to still try to build the best overall deck you can, the most cohesive overall deck you can. And if you open a busted black card, but you only open 5 black playables, then what are you going to do? Well, the answer in this format is mostly you're going to play your bomb.
Play your demon. Because
first of all, it's basically impossible to win 5 playables in a color now. Every common's playable, just about. That used to not be the case. It used to be like, hey, I opened 11 black cards and 6 of them are actually cards that I can put in my deck. The other 5 are just not cards I can put in my deck. They're all chimney imps,
Mm-hmm.
So what you should do in this format is if you open one of the like really top tier cards, again, some of the cards like I mentioned earlier that basically most of the rares and mythics, that are just like have a huge impact on the board, Ill-Tempered Loner or Cemetery Desecrator, Edgar Charmed Groom, Oldenwald Oddity, all these cards, you should try very hard to put those cards in your deck. You should really like bend over backwards. And then the other things is that you should also look at ways to interact with your opponent who's playing these. So that means cards like Bleed Dry and Grisly Ritual and another key counterspells. Like these cards are valuable because most of your opponents will have a bomb in their deck, like way more than half, and some will have multiple. So ways to answer a Hullbreaker Horror, not that there are many, are something that you want. Ways to stop Dreadfast Demon from hitting the table, whether that's a counterspell or leaving mana up for Bleed Dry or what have you. Really important because you're going to face a lot of the bombs, and especially if you want to do well in a sealed tournament, what do you think the decks are going to look like when you're 5-0?
Oh my God. Yeah. They're going to be the decks that opened the bombs, but also had those in their primary colors as well. That's what it's going to look like.
Yeah. The person who has 3 of the best blue-black cards and a good blue-black shell, that's more what you're going to be playing against. You've got some knobs you can turn. Again, you can put in counterspells. Syncopate becomes great in this format, right?
Yep.
You can try to build an aggro deck. I really haven't found that to be successful in sealed. I've built about 15 sealeds, and they don't really lend themselves to aggro decks very often. Like you can try to be assertive. You can try to, pressure the opponent, but that's usually not the only thing that matters. Like what you can do is try to build a deck that can get on the board and then make it so you only need 1 counterspell or 1 piece of removal. Mm-hmm. You don't want to build a deck that is trying to go toe-to-toe and just beat all their bombs, right?
You're not going to smash through every single amazing bomb that they have, yeah.
Right. So I'm not saying you need to build an aggro deck because I think that's difficult. What I am saying is try to build a deck that if you can deal with their first bomb, that's enough to often, kind of close out the game. You don't need to just go toe-to-toe with every single card they play.
Okay.
You can splash, again, Evolving Wilds, Foreboding Statue, Honored Heirloom, Weaver of Blossoms. These cards all, plus the rare lands, though obviously you hope not to open any of those.
I know that it really hurts in the bomb-heavy formats when, 2 of your rares are just random lands. That's happened to me a bunch of times, yeah.
If you have these, you can splash, and what you're looking to splash for are bombs like you have like Olivia, right? And your deck's supposed to be blue-red, but you want to splash Olivia out of the black section, or removal that like single pipped removal, so Rending Flame or something like that, Grisly Ritual, because these can kill some of their more expensive cards as well. And if you're able to do that, then you're going to end up in a spot where it's probably worth splashing, even though, splashing can be a little awkward, just to make it a little bit better so that you can end up a little more likely to be able to deal with some of their best cards.
Yep. That's really important. You have to be willing to do that, especially if your shell doesn't have the tool either, because the 2 things that you're looking for are bombs for yourself and ways to deal with your opponent's bombs.
What has been your experience with color breakdown? I found that you're black or red almost all the time.
Almost every time. I mean, basically I look at black first and I look for how many, actual removal spells, heroes, downfalls, and bleed rise I have. That's the first stop that I go to basically every single time. I also look for Dreadfast Demon, as it turns out.
Yes.
Because it's a regular rare. It feels like a mythic, but it's not. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think that white is okay, green and blue are okay, but basically you're going to play black or red or both a lot of the time, almost all the time, and then one of the other three colors with, it kind of depends. Like green is actually weaker than it normally is in sealed. Normally green's one of the better sealed colors. It just turns out there's not that much actual green fixing in this format. So one of the reasons to play green used to be like, hey, you get like 2 different common rampant growth type effects, so you can play 3 or 4 colors and play all your good cards. Well, green doesn't really have that much fixing, so you're not going to end up in that spot, I think, all that often.
Yeah, the thing I do like about green, and I think it does fill out the third slot for me for whatever reason, is that it does have a really strong mid-range game with just like a bunch of werewolves that are very big, that are powerful cards on their own that you can leverage to at least, try to do something punchy in the mid range. And you're not quite as punished by people going like 1 drop, 2 drop, 3 drop in sealed. So I feel like I can get away with playing like the Hook Hand Mariner and stuff, which I play in draft too, but where I feel like it could actually be pretty good here. Versus like the more conditional stuff like the white training cards or, some of the, like basically just smaller blue cards that would go like in the blue-white deck, that type of thing. So I think if I had to do it, it would be black, red, green, and then blue-white, or I don't know which one is which, to kind of round out the bottom for the sealeds that I've done.
Yeah. And really what you want to look for is you want to look for your rares and see like, hey, do I have any of the top rares in the set? If so, let's try to play them.
Any of the 22 of them or whatever it was.
Yeah, exactly. You want to look at the interaction you have. So that's counterspells and removal. And then you want to look at kind of like, okay, well, what are just like the B level cards I have in each color?
Yep.
Because that's like kind of your next tiebreaker. Because, yeah, you want to look at like, how many of the just like solid like Fellstinger, Diregraph Scavenger type cards do you have to just put in your deck? And once you kind of figure that out, then you can kind of start to build your deck. And it's not wildly different, but again, more on counterspells, more on discard. Like Aim for the Head and Dread Fugue are both a lot more appealing in sealed because your opponent's just more likely to have a 6-mana card you really want to deal with. Mm-hmm. And then see how many playables that is, and hopefully it's 23 and you don't have to splash. But if you have to splash, you got to splash, and that can sometimes be the case. Plus, if you have a lot of ways to generate blood tokens, it's not the worst to play 18 lands. Like that ends up working out just fine.
It also can mask some splashes too if you do have decent amount of blood tokens. You can discard the card that you can't cast and try to get something that you can.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's been tough. I think that the focal point for me, I mean, the obvious focal point are the bombs, but the one that's actually addressable is the second point you made about finding interaction that is meaningful in cards that you normally wouldn't play in draft. And as you said, that, that really comes down to some of the more conditional stuff. It sounds weird to call it interaction, but the card is it called Aim High? Is that what it was?
Yeah.
Yeah. That exiles 2 cards.
Aim for the head.
Aim for the head. That's the one that exiles 2 cards or it kills the zombie. And I would just jam as many of those as I could. Like everybody's playing every Hullbreaker, every Dreadfast, everything that costs 6 and 7 mana. And you know how it is. If you play Mind Rot against those type of effects, they either have to discard their bomb, which they're not going to do, or the lands that they need to cast it. So you're going to buy yourself a heck of a lot of time. And if you time it correctly, when they have 1 or 2 cards left, you can actually nab that bomb. And if you're low on removal, if you don't have any other ways to interact, then that might be the best plan that you have. On the other end of the spectrum are the counterspells that Luis mentioned. There's actually quite a few in this format, and I think I would play any of them if I was playing blue. Hullbreaker Horror's the one exception. It's not counterable, but boy, you nab their Dreadfast team and it never hits the battlefield, and you're going to feel like a champion. And, Syncopate's easily the best of those. You would play that anyway, but, there's a couple of variants, the counter target creature. I would definitely play that. And then the other one's the it's the mana leak that you get modified on or whatever, I'd probably play that too. Like, again, this is kind of assuming I don't have like a really solid package of removal. And my experience in sealed is that I'd never have a really solid package of removal. I'm like, give me a bleed dry. Like just ship me one bleed dry and I'll try to make it work. And, I feel relieved if I see it, but I've never left with like, wow, I've got 3 bleed dry and 2 these and another one of these is backup. Like that never happens. I always feel like I need to scrap it out a little bit for, counters or something weird. Same thing with more conditional cards, right? Crushing Canopy. I mean, I had opponents splash for it against me in sealed. And I'm like, yeah, I can kind of see it actually. Like they didn't really have a whole lot else going on. And they killed my flyer with it. And I'm like, yeah, you do what you got to do. I would main deck, Crushing Canopy all day long.
I would main deck it. I would not splash for it, but yeah, I
wouldn't either. It felt like a stretch, but again, I was like, like probably incorrect to do so, but not as incorrect as it would normally be, I guess is how I describe it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of cards it hits, and then, of course, when it hits, it tends to hit one of the best cards in their deck.
That's right. It just has a very high upside. And again, there's a lot of necessary evil happening here, right? There's a lot of, like, I'm stretching my mana a bit, or I'm playing cards that are much more conditional, but I have to do what I have to do because if one of these bombs hits the battlefield, the game ends so quickly. I wasn't kidding. Like, when I was watching Woody play that sealed, it's just like every single time he played the demon, it was just the person scooped if he got to make the copy. Like immediately. It's just the game was just over and that was it. And that's one of, 15 or 20 cards that, are really difficult to beat in that way. All right. Any other last thoughts on sealed before we wrap up the show, Luis?
No, but good luck for everyone playing in sealed. I think there's a lot of play to sealed, but the bombs make this a little rougher of a sealed format than normal.
I feel like it's a really tough one. We brushed on it earlier, but the fact that there's a cycle of rare lands to me makes it really tough. You open up and you look at your 6 things and it's like, you're really hoping for bombs. And if 2 of them are lands that are like fringe playable and they're not, and you don't get the bombs, it's going to feel really, it's going to be really disheartening. Like if I go down to Vegas and I open up one of those pools, it's just like, if I don't have a lot of good answers for their bombs, I'm going to have to go through them. And if I don't have them myself, it really does make it tough. I think we're going to see a pretty widespread here where some people are going to have like absurd seals and there's going to be some just like, maybe you should just go find your favorite restaurant, seal decks. But at any rate, I will be down there again. And if you are, come up and say hi or show me your seal deck or whatever, and I'd be happy to chat for a minute. Let's call it a show there, Luis. Lots of stuff covered in this episode. And of course, as we move forward through the format, we will be giving you our thoughts and updates. And as things change and adapt, we'll be keeping you up to date on those as well. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com. The show is brought to you by Channel Fireball. You can check out mtgvegas.com if you want to, book a last minute flight or something, or just kind of see what's going on there, but also just on channelfireball.com. CFB Pro is where you can find the article that Luis wrote about sealed, so you can get even more depth out of that if you'd like, over on Channel Fireball. And again, if you do end up picking up anything over at CFB, if you use the affiliate code LR, we appreciate it. The show is also brought to you by FTX, place to go for all of your digital asset needs, ftx.com outside the U.S. and ftx.us within the U.S. They are regulated, safe, and you can rest assured that your investment will be safe there. If you do decide to make an investment, make sure that you consult an investment professional before doing so. That's going to do it for this episode of LR. We'll see you next week.
So when looking at, kind of like the best cards in sealed of all time or best cards in limited of all time, well, one that kind of routinely tops list is Pack Rat, right?
Yeah.
And then another one that doesn't maybe top the list of all time, but like certainly in that format, Return to Ravnica, is Mizium Mortars.
Mm-hmm.
And,
wouldn't it be nice to open both of those in a...
Well, see, so as it turns out, so this is a 1 in a red, deal 4 to target creature you don't control, or 3 red, overload, deal 4 to all their creatures. So Plague Wind, and then of course Pack Rat's Pack Rat. You play it, you make another copy, the game ends. Martin at one point in a in a Pro Tour submitted a deck of two pack rats and 38 swamps. Because he was Grixis, and he kept opening pack rats in his red-blue deck, and he realized after round 1 that he should just side into 38 swamps, 2 pack rats.
So you just mulligan to pack rat every time?
Yep, and he went 2-1 after losing round 1.
Oh my god, that's incredible.
So these 2 cards were actually 2 cards that appeared in one of my sealed decks at Grand Prix Indianapolis, and I ended up making top 8 of that tournament. And then the next week in Philadelphia, I actually also opened Mortars plus Pack Rat, and I ended up making top 8 of that tournament. When we're talking about sealed decks and opening good sealeds. And the argument I would always use against Pat and Ben, these are the guys I travel with to the tournament, and they're, obviously really, I think just being haters about the whole thing. I said, look,
there was a lot of those, by the way.
Someone has to open both Pack Rat and Mortars. It might as well be me, right?
Why not me?
Yeah. Why shouldn't it be me? And then, as it turns out,
I'm sure they love to hear this.
Pat, of course, is an engineer. He, understands things. He would explain to me, no, someone doesn't have to open both those. That's not how math works. In fact, it's about 1 in 10,000 that someone opens those in 2 different tournaments, and there weren't even 10,000 people in both tournaments. So that didn't make sense either. But at the end of the day, all I wanted to know was who had the Pack Rat, who had the Mortars, and who had the top hits.